Hey, what is up, mortals? Season 2 Part 6 of What If Deku Got 100% of One for All. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. We'll see about that. Little brother, Shigaraki stood in silence, boggled at the remark that had passed from in between his dry, cracked lips. Little brother. His mind brought him back to the same day that his powers originally surfaced. How the dog crumbled in his hands. How his sister's lively skin turned dry, gray and cadaverous before it crumbled into dust like the dog. All around him the house seemed to follow, crumbling, decaying. His mother had tried to flee, running out into the front yard before she even succumbed to the spread of the little boy's decay. It left him with his father as his sole guardian. And even then that bastardous old man stood strong amongst all the destruction to berate the little boy. Even standing before death itself, the insufferable son of a bitch kept going, berating the young Tamura, berating his deceased grandmother, cursing the heroes, their quirks, and their very society itself. The decay, however, spared the man, curving around him and leaving him in the only spot in the home not currently disintegrating before their eyes. Like a cat, Tamura pounced on the man, grabbing the man's face in a vice-like grip. He screamed and screamed, cried and begged. Slowly the color drained from his skin, his screaming falling short before he too crumbled into nothing in the hands of Tamura Shigaraki. Maybe this quirk had yet some lingering trace of his former master within, some surviving fragment of All for One that was affecting his thoughts. The idea of this made Shigaraki frown in dissatisfaction. In that moment an idea bloomed in his mind. He didn't want to be like All for One. No, he wanted to be better than the man. He would reject what lingering spur of the King of Darkness remained, in turn, become the most feared villain that had ever walked the earth. His frown was soon replaced by a smile so wide his face could barely contain it. He would decay the very foundations of society, and when it all crumbled then he would rebuild upon it and make one ruled solely by him and his most trusted few amongst the league. Would you just shut the hell up and burn already? Dabai's raspy tone snapped Tamura from his thoughts. Extending a palm, blue flame was belched from his palm in a hypnotizing wave of azure blue. The scorching hot flames threw both young heroes immediately into action. Izuku immediately jumped up, while simultaneously Bakugo used his explosions to propel himself up after the young wielder of One for All. Using another blast midair to turn, he used one hand to form a circle with his fingers before the other's palm. Ultimate move, he exclaimed, AP shot, auto cannon. A barrage of explosions rained down atop Dabai and the others, forcing them to scatter. Shigaraki grimaced. In the blink of an eye he was in the air alongside Bakugo. Kaken, look out, Izuku bellowed. In a show of crackling green lightning, the young hero appeared beside Bakugo, fist balled and ready to obliterate. Swinging at Shigaraki with all his might, an explosion of force practically vaporized the side of the building and sent the young Prince of Darkness skipping across like ground like a rock on a pound before slamming through several buildings in the distance. A ball of condensed blue flame struck Midoriya, exploding upon impact and sending him flying off into the intact portion of the warehouse's wall, still smoking. Bakugo frowned, turning to look for the source of the flame when a punch to the gut sent him flying into the same wall. Dabai stood, flame gathered in his hand, backed on either side by Spinner, Magni, Toga, and Compress. All the while the remainder of the Shy Hasekai stood just behind him. Kendo, Rappa, and Tengai have entered the battlefield, the largest of the two standing beside the monk with his fist still smoking from the force behind the impact. I was supposed to be the one to kill him. About that scrawny kid, Rappa complained, causing Tengai to roll his eyes. Now's not the time for your childish antics, Rappa. Make sure the boy is down, he said. Izuku laid, clothing burned and flesh singed. He clenched his fist tight, pain coursing through his burned arms and legs and flooding his nervous system with all kinds of signals. Slowly rising up from the rubble, he barely had time to duck a heavy right hook from the large, former member of the 8 Precepts of Death. The barrage didn't stop there, however. The hook was followed by a flurry of blows that left Midoriya bruised and battered, glaring up at the large man in the plague doctor's mask. He struggled to stand before another flurry sent him right back down into the wall where he had landed. This can't be where I die, not now, he mumbled to himself. Young Midoriya, a familiar voice said. The young freckle-faced youth opened his eyes, and before him stood not only All Might, but the other former users of One for All. Each one wore a look of familiarity, each one adorning a smile. I'm sorry that I wasn't around long enough to properly guide you, especially now, when you need me the most. Now more than ever you need to harness my power, our power, and defeat Shigaraki and save not only our city, but Japan and the world, Toshinoru said, kneeling down to the boy and offering him a hand. He winced, beaten and bloodied, and took his hand. Before we get back into the story, I would like to say that we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive is a channel based on a variety of anime lore. If you are interested in content like this, make sure you click the icon on the top right corner or check the description below for a link to the channel. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back into the story. A viscous black energy built up in the palm of his hand, and, in a flash, a black whip of energy suddenly wrapped both of the brawler's large fists. Rappa grunted in confusion, glancing back down at Izuku before a 25% uppercut sent the large brawler airborne. Rising up from the rubble, green electricity burned hot in his eyes before he immediately went from a 25% punch to an 85% punch. The air pressure change reduced Tengai's barrier to shards and sending not only him, but the entire Shai Hasekai and the league careening off into the distance. All for one. Delaware, Texas smash, he bellowed. His knees buckled slightly. He tiredly looked over to where Katsuki had landed and found his friend struggling to stand with what he suspected were several broken ribs. Offering the atomic blonde a helping hand, he took it with some added spice. Standing with Midoriya's help. I didn't need any of her help, you damn nerd. He spat. Ignoring him, he looked down at the black whip that had materialized in his hand. Was this what All Might meant? He thought to himself. He looked up as the approaching sounds of sirens came and along with it an influx of other heroes, with their teacher leading the charge. Sorry, Mr. Aizawa, Izuku said breathlessly, smiling bashfully. He opened his mouth to speak, before a sudden condensed blast of air tore through not only the hero Crust, who stood at his side, but his back and stomach, splattering both the ground in front of Izuku with viscera and entrails but also catching the entire hero congregation by surprise. Conflict ensued as, left and right, heroes were reduced to blood or merely ripped apart as something akin to a raging bull came charging from where Izuku had sent him flying moments earlier. You thought you'd win this, Izuku Midoriya, Shigaraki bellowed over the death throes of heroes. The bloodied Eraserhead looked up at the green and blonde-haired boys. Rue, Shigaraki planted a foot on the ebony-haired man's back, cutting him off mid-sentence as he crumbled into dust on the ground before them, leaving the two young heroes standing breathlessly before the massacred remains of heroes and police alike. Bakugo bit back his rage, but before he could blast himself forward, a wall of bright blue flame slammed into him, scorching him and throwing him back into the wall. You thought you could get rid of us that easily? Thanks for the help, twice, Dabai rasped, offering his teammate a nod of approval. Anything I could do to help. Anything to watch these boys suffer, he responded. You won't win this, you bastard. The wall, and everything behind it was vaporized behind the force of Bakugo's explosion as he launched himself like a bullet at Shigaraki, flying through the flames and ignoring the burns as he threw out a hand. Howitzer, Impa, he grunted as Shigaraki dashed forward to meet him, activating air cannon simultaneously as he slammed a balled-up fist into the young atomic blonde's gut, blowing a hole through him so clean that Midoriya could see Shigaraki from the other side. Crimson flew from the blonde's mouth, before Shigaraki clamped a hand over his face, draining him of his quirk within seconds. The heroes aren't going to win this time, Shigaraki hissed. Izuku watched in horror as his friend decayed before his eyes, crumbling into dust within the grasp of the new Prince of Darkness. Materializing his black whip, he threw it out and wrapped Shigaraki's right arm, pulling him forward and directly into a 100% jab that entirely flayed the skin off the right side of his face. However, it regenerated moments later and he gave the young hero the same punch back threefold, sending him flying across the battlefield and into the opposing wall. Dabai, I need you, Shigaraki spat. The black-haired pyrokinetic waltzed up to meet him at his side. Shigaraki turned before grasping his shoulder. I need your power to help kill this insolent brat. He won't die as easily as I thought, he said. Dabai offered him an odd smile, before suddenly the two of them merged, thanks to the quirk taken from Overhaul. The two of them screamed in agony as their flesh, bones, and quirks merged into a four-armed abomination that resembled Shigaraki but with the features of Dabai. The newly mutated Prince of Darkness grinned at the flame that sparked to life in each four of his palms. Turning, he sent a proverbial tidal wave of flame across the warehouse, melting not only the back wall, but several miles of both buildings and people behind it. The crackle of lightning behind him, however, confirmed that Deku, however an annoyance, had yet to perish. One for all. 300%. Smash. A flurry of energized punches ripped and tore chunks from Shigaraki's mutated form, removing limbs which seemed to piece themselves back on moments later. Discouraged, but not beaten, Midoriya continued hammering away at his foe's mutated form, until both fists were suddenly stopped by Shigaraki's two bottom hands while the other two belched flames directly into Izuku's pale face, scorching his flesh as well as his eyes and blackening the world he knew into darkness. A double-fisted jab sent the boy careening off into the rubble ahead of him. Bloodied, burned, battered, and blind, he continued to stand yet again on legs that barely supported him. Why won't you just die? Shigaraki yelled, grabbing not only Rappa with one hand, but Magni too. The two of them merged with Shigaraki's already warped form. Rappa protested and fought, but Shigaraki was stronger, and before the green-haired boy's eyes stood the newly warped Shigaraki, standing at 12 feet in height and with now 8 arms and several dozens of quirks at his disposal. All for one. Unlimited %. United States, Japan, and the world. Shigaraki's eyes widened as Deku's body suddenly began emitting a bright green glow, so bright he had to shield his eyes from its intensity. Smash! Dashing forward at a speed in which he couldn't even comprehend. His fist impacted Shigaraki's face with an explosion of force so great that it had appeared from orbit that a bomb had perhaps been dropped on Japan. Burning up in the wave of energy, Shigaraki screamed out in rage as well as half of the city, the League, and the Shai Hasekai were reduced to atoms in the following wave of energy. He collapsed to his knees, clutching at the remains of his now missing right arm and shoulder. His body was burned and broken, but he continued to look on with hope in his fading green eyes, at the welcoming arms of All Might as he and the others beckoned him with warm embraces. He had won. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We The Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We The Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.